The sun was dipping low over the strange valley, painting the sky with a red glow. The air smelled of dust and smoke, and silence stretched across the land like a warning. A lone human traveler walked slowly, his boots crunching on the dry ground. His name was Daniel, a wanderer who had traveled across many alien worlds, but this place felt different. The land seemed too quiet, as if holding its breath. He stopped when he heard faint cries echoing through the rocks. His eyes narrowed. The sound was sharp, desperate, and high-pitched. He climbed up a ridge, careful not to make noise. From the top, he looked down into the valley and his breath caught. Below him, a group of tiny aliens, no taller than his waist, were running in panic. Their skin glowed faintly like blue crystal, and their clothes were made of woven leaves and bright threads. They clutched each other as they stumbled across the rocky floor. Behind them thundered large raiders, tall and brutal, carrying jagged weapons. Their laughter echoed, cruel and mocking. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen this before. Big predators hunting the weak. He hated it. His hand brushed over the old earth-made weapon strapped to his side, a pulse rifle scratched from years of use. He muttered under his breath, "Not today." The raiders closed in on the tiny aliens. One of the small creatures tripped, a child with glowing hair. The child cried out as a raider lifted his axe to strike. Without thinking, Daniel raised his rifle. A sharp blast cut through the valley. The raider dropped with a scream, smoke rising from his chest. The valley froze. The tiny aliens stopped running, their eyes wide in shock. The raiders turned toward the ridge where Daniel stood. His tall figure stood against the red sky, rifle glowing faintly in his hands. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. The raiders roared and charged toward him. Their heavy boots shook the earth. Daniel knelt, steadying his aim. Each shot cracked like thunder, dropping one raider after another. But there were too many. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Run!" His voice echoed across the valley. The tiny aliens understood. They scrambled into the rocks, guiding their young ones to safety. Daniel leapt down from the ridge, rolling on the ground before springing to his feet. A raider swung a blade at him. Sparks flew as Daniel blocked with the rifle's butt and kicked the alien back. Another came from the side. Daniel spun and fired point blank, the flash lighting up the attacker's face before it fell. Sweat dripped down his brow. His muscles burned. Still he fought. Each movement was sharp, controlled, born of training and stubborn human will. He fought not for glory, not for riches, but because it was the right thing to do. The tiny aliens watched from behind rocks, their crystal-like eyes shining in awe and fear. They had never seen such fury, such fire in a giant being. One whispered, "He fights for us." Another answered, "Why would he? We are nothing." But the child who had been saved shook their head and whispered, "He is different." The raiders realized the fight was slipping away. Their leader snarled and raised a horn. A loud call echoed, signaling retreat. One by one, the raiders pulled back, their glares filled with hatred. They left behind their dead and wounded, disappearing into the far hills. Silence returned to the valley, broken only by Daniel's heavy breathing. He lowered his rifle, the glow fading. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes remained sharp. He looked around at the tiny aliens, unsure if they would run from him too. Slowly, the small chief of the aliens stepped forward. His body was barely the size of Daniel's arm, but his voice was proud. "Giant," he said, "you saved us." Daniel blinked. The word giant felt strange, but the gratitude in the chief's eyes was clear. Around them, the aliens gathered, still afraid but filled with wonder. Children peeked from behind rocks, clutching their glowing toys. Mothers held their little ones close. All of them stared at the human who had stood against monsters for their sake. Daniel sighed, slinging the rifle across his back. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "I couldn't just stand by." But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The raiders would return, stronger and angrier, and the question clawed at his mind. What would happen to these fragile beings without someone to defend them? As the last light of the sun disappeared behind the jagged peaks, Daniel stood tall in the valley of the tiny aliens. He had arrived as a wanderer, but now the weight of their survival pressed onto his shoulders. And in that moment, The future of both human and alien paths quietly began to twist together. The night air in the valley was cool, carrying the smell of damp earth and burning torches. Daniel walked carefully as the tiny aliens led him through hidden paths between tall rocks. They moved fast despite their small legs, whispering to each other in their high voices. Their glowing skin lit the trail like faint lanterns. Daniel felt like he was following a procession of stars across the ground. At last, the narrow path opened into a secret valley. Daniel froze. It was a village unlike anything he had ever seen. The houses were small, shaped from curved stones and woven leaves, each glowing softly with crystals fixed into their walls. Tiny bridges crossed over streams, and delicate wind chimes made of shells rang with the breeze. Everything seemed alive yet fragile. Like a dream painted in light, the aliens gathered around him, murmuring and pointing. To them, Daniel looked like a towering giant. His head nearly touched the hanging branches. The children hid behind their parents at first, but their crystal eyes were filled with curiosity. One brave child stepped forward, clutching a glowing toy. They whispered in awe. Protector, the chief, an old alien with a crown of carved wood and feathers, stepped before Daniel. Though barely the size of Daniel's arm, his voice carried weight. Giant, the chief said. You risked your life for ours. No one has ever done this before. We owe you. Daniel shook his head slowly. You don't owe me anything. I couldn't stand and watch. His voice was calm but firm. He meant it. Yet deep down, he felt the eyes of the whole village pressing on him. He was an outsider, and outsiders were rarely welcomed with open arms. The villagers began preparing a feast in his honor. Tiny fires burned as they roasted small creatures on sticks. Bowls of glowing fruit were brought, and clay cups filled with sweet water were offered. Daniel sat awkwardly on the ground, his knees towering higher than their tables. The food was small in his hands, but he accepted every bite with gratitude. He could see the relief in their faces, yet not all were convinced. A group of elders whispered to each other. Why would he defend us? Giants never help the small. What if he seeks to rule us? Suspicion clung to their words. Daniel noticed their glances. He knew trust could not be earned in a single battle. It would take more, much more. As the night deepened, music filled the air. The aliens danced, their steps light and fast, their voices rising in songs Daniel could not understand. But the melody touched something in him. It spoke of survival, of sorrow, and of hope. He found himself staring at the faces of the children, laughing again after fear, and he felt a heavy warmth in his chest. The chief raised his hand, silencing the crowd. Hear me, he declared. This human stood against the raiders when none else would. He fought like a storm. He is proof that not all giants bring pain. Tonight he is welcome in our valley. Cheers rose, high and sharp. The children clapped, women sang louder. Even the suspicious elders lowered their eyes. Daniel nodded in respect, but inside he wondered, how long can this peace last? He knew the raiders would not forget. They would return with greater strength, and when they did, this fragile village would stand no chance without protection. His heart grew heavy with the thought. Later, when the feast ended, the chief invited Daniel into a larger hut decorated with glowing crystals. Inside, maps and carvings filled the walls, showing battles and raids from the past. The chief looked serious. You saved us today, but tomorrow more will come. The raiders have long wanted our valley. They will not stop until we are gone. His small hands shook, but his eyes were hard. We need you, giant. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. I can fight, yes, but I am only one man. How many warriors do you have? The chief looked down, ashamed. Too few. We are makers, singers, farmers, not fighters. We were never meant for war. The weight of their helplessness pressed on Daniel. He had fought battles before, he had lost comrades before, and he had promised himself never to be tied down again. But looking at the chief, at the tiny people who had nothing to shield them but fragile walls and hope, he felt that promise crumble. When Daniel stepped out into the cool night again, the village was quiet. The stars burned bright overhead. He sat on a rock at the edge, watching the streams glow faintly in the dark. Behind him, the whispers of the villagers reached his ears. Some called him protector, some still doubted. But one truth was clear. His actions had already changed their lives. A small figure approached. It was the child he had saved. They sat near his boots, holding the glowing toy close. "Thank you," the child said softly. "If you hadn't come, I would be gone. My mother says you are like the mountain, tall and strong. Will you stay?" Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at the child's innocent eyes, and he couldn't answer. Because the truth was, he didn't know. As the night wind rustled the glowing trees, Daniel realized he had stepped into something larger than himself. He had defended strangers, but now they were no longer strangers. They were depending on him. And deep in his heart, he knew that this valley would not let him walk away so easily. The morning came with a soft mist drifting over the valley. The glowing huts of the tiny aliens shimmered like fireflies under the rising sun. Daniel stood at the edge of the stream, splashing cool water on his face. His body ached from the battle the day before, but his mind was heavier than his muscles. He knew the raiders would return, and next time it would be worse. Behind him, the villagers stirred, preparing for the day. Some worked in the fields, others fetched water. Children ran across the bridges, their laughter sharp in the morning air. For a moment it looked like peace had returned, yet Daniel could feel it. The calm was fragile, ready to shatter. The chief summoned him to the largest hut. The air inside was heavy with smoke from burning herbs. Carvings of old battles and strange symbols lined the walls. The chief sat on a raised stone, his eyes serious. Around him stood elders, their crystal-like faces stern. Daniel entered, bowing slightly to show respect. The chief began, "Human, you fought for us when none else dared. You saved our children, our families, our home." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of centuries. "But the raiders will not stop. They will return with more fire and more blood. We are too small to face them alone." Daniel crossed his arms. "I know, but I'm only one man. You need an army, not a wanderer like me." His voice was calm, but his words carried truth. He had fought many battles in his life. He knew the odds. The elders murmured among themselves. Some nodded, others frowned. The chief raised his hand for silence. "That is why we must bind you to us," he said firmly, "not only as protector but as family." Daniel blinked. Family. The chief nodded slowly. "Among our people, when a stranger saves us, we make him one of us. We seal it with a bond so strong that even death cannot break it. You will no longer be outsider. You will be tied to our blood, our customs, our fate." Daniel's brows furrowed. He had not expected this. He thought they would give him thanks, maybe gifts, but not this. "And what bond are you speaking of?" he asked cautiously. The chief looked at the crowd of elders, then back at Daniel. His voice was steady. "You will take one of our daughters as your life companion, a mini-wife. She will guide you, teach you, and through her, you will belong to us." The words struck Daniel like a blow. For a moment he thought he had misheard. He had fought for them because it was right, not because he wanted a wife, and certainly not from a people so different. His mouth went dry. "Wait, you want me to marry?" The villagers outside the hut began to gather, whispers spreading like fire. Their eyes were wide with excitement. Some looked at Daniel with admiration, others with envy. Children tugged at each other's hands, giggling. The idea of a giant becoming part of their tribe was both shocking and thrilling. Daniel raised his hands. "Chief, I don't think you understand. I didn't fight for reward. I fought because I couldn't just watch." But the chief's expression did not soften. "You misunderstand. This is not reward. This is duty. If you are tied to us, you will stay, you will defend us, and we will defend you. Without this bond, you will always be outsider, and outsiders leave when storms come." The weight of the words hung in the air. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew they were right. He had seen it before. Wanderers moved on, mercenaries abandoned villages when the gold ran out. Only family stayed. Only family bled together. Still his mind rebelled. Marriage was not something he had expected, not something he wanted forced. Yet he saw the desperation in their eyes. They had no armies, no allies, only hope in him, and hope, they feared, could vanish without a chain. To bind it, an elder stepped forward, his voice sharp. If you refuse, we will not stop you. You may walk away, but know this. When the raiders return, our blood will be on your hands. Daniel clenched his fists. His breath came heavy. The image of the child he had saved flashed before him, their glowing eyes filled with trust. He remembered their words. Will you stay? And he realized that leaving now would haunt him forever. Finally, he looked at the chief. If I agree, who will this companion be? The chief's eyes softened for the first time. One who is brave, one who understands the weight of tradition. She will not chain you, but she will walk with you. She will remind you of your bond when doubt creeps in. Daniel closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he nodded slowly. I will not break your customs. I will honor them. But understand this, I am no god. I cannot promise miracles, only that I will fight as long as I breathe. The chief bowed his head in respect. That is all we ask. The hut filled with sharp cries of approval. The villagers outside cheered. Their songs rose into the air. For them, the decision had been made. The human was no longer outsider. He was one of them. But as Daniel stepped out into the sunlight, hearing the cheers echoing across the valley, his heart remained unsettled. He had agreed to a bond that would tie him to these people forever. A bond that came not from his choice but from their need. And though he had stood against raiders with courage, this new challenge, the challenge of belonging, felt heavier than any battle he had ever fought. The village was alive with music that night. Torches burned along the crystal huts, their light reflecting on the streams. Tiny drums beat in rhythm, and voices rose in high-pitched songs that echoed across the valley. Daniel sat near the edge of the gathering, watching in silence. He had fought wars, crossed countless worlds, yet nothing felt as strange as this moment. The cheers, the songs, all of it was for him, the giant who had defended the fragile. The chief stood proudly in the center, his feathers glinting in the firelight. Around him, the villagers waited, their eyes wide with excitement. Tonight was the night they would seal the bond. Tonight was the night the human would become more than a protector. He would become family. From the crowd, a small figure stepped forward. She was slender, barely reaching Daniel's knee. Her skin glowed faintly with silver-blue light. Her hair, long and shining like strands of crystal, swayed as she walked. She did not bow, she did not tremble. Her eyes met Daniel's firmly. For such a small being, her presence was sharp and steady. The chief raised his hand. This is Lyra, daughter of our people. She is brave, she is wise, and she will stand as companion to the giant. From this night forward, you will not walk alone. She will be your bond, your guide, your reminder that you belong. The villagers cheered, their voices echoing like bells. But Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at her, at Lyra, the one they now called his mini-wife. He had faced blades and fire without fear. But this was different. He had never asked for this, never expected it. Lyra stopped in front of him, tilting her head back to look into his eyes. Her voice was soft but firm. Do not think of this as chains, human. Our law binds us not for control but for unity. You fought for us. Now we fight for you together. We are stronger. Her words carried a weight beyond her size. Daniel could not deny it. He saw no fear in her, only determination. Still, he could not hide the storm in his heart. Lyra, he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the music. I don't want you to think this was my choice. I didn't fight for reward. I fought because it was right. Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. And that is why the bond is true. If you had fought for reward, you would not be worthy. Our law may seem strange, but it has kept us alive. We are too small to stand alone, so we weave bonds that cannot break. The ceremony began. Villagers formed a circle around them, holding glowing crystals in their hands. The chief chanted old words, his voice deep and steady. The light from the crystals rose, weaving patterns in the night air. The sound of the drums grew faster. Louder. Daniel felt the pressure of countless eyes, the weight of an entire people's, hope pressing against his shoulders. When the chant ended, Lyra reached up and touched his hand with her tiny fingers. Her skin was warm, her touch light, yet the gesture felt heavier than iron. "By our bond," she said, "you are no longer a wanderer. You are one of us." The villagers cheered again, throwing petals of glowing flowers into the air. Children laughed, women sang. Men beat the drums louder. For them, the bond was complete. The human was theirs and they were his. Daniel sat still, his hand trembling where Lyra had touched it. He had faced many choices in his life, but this one was not his to make. It had been made for him by the weight of their law, their need. And yet, looking at Lyra's unwavering gaze, he felt something stir. She was not fragile like the others. There was strength hidden in her small frame. As the night wore on, the villagers celebrated, but Daniel and Lyra sat apart on a flat stone. The firelight flickered between them. Daniel broke the silence. "You don't have to do this. You're young. You could live free without being tied to me." Lyra shook her head, her crystal hair shimmering. "You still don't understand, do you? This is not about me, not about you. It is about us, our people, our survival. The raiders will return, and when they do, we cannot face them alone. You gave us hope. I give you belonging. That is the bond." Her words hit him harder than any blade. He realized she carried the same burden he did, the same weight of responsibility. And though she was small, she was no less brave than any warrior he had ever known. The night grew quiet as the celebration faded. The villagers went to rest, leaving the valley under the watch of the glowing stars. Daniel remained awake, staring at the sky. Lyra sat beside him, silent but steady. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I don't know if I can be what you need me to be." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You already are," she said simply. Then she leaned back against the stone, closing her eyes. Daniel stared at her for a long time, feeling the storm inside him slowly ease. The bond had been made. The path had been chosen. And though Daniel had not sought it, he now carried the fate of a people in his hands. The mini-wife was not a chain. She was a symbol, a reminder that he was no longer alone. And deep within him, a new thought began to grow. Maybe, just maybe, this bond was not a burden, but a strength. The valley slept under a blanket of stars, but Daniel could not. He sat on a rock with his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the shadows of the mountains. He knew silence like this was dangerous. It was the kind that came before storms. Lyra sat beside him, her small figure wrapped in a glowing shawl. Her voice was calm, though her eyes carried worry. "They will come. I feel it. Raiders never forget." Daniel gave a small nod. "That's what I'm afraid of." His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. He had seen the same pattern on many worlds. A first attack to test defenses, a second to crush them. The next day, scouts returned with news that froze the village in fear. Raiders were marching with greater numbers, beasts with iron masks, weapons that burned hotter than fire. The sound of drums echoed faintly across the hills, a promise of violence drawing near. The villagers panicked. Mothers clutched their children, elders muttered prayers. Daniel stood tall in the middle of the square, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If you want to live, we prepare now." He organized them with quick commands. The men gathered stones, the women dug trenches. Even children carried small bundles of supplies. Daniel taught them how to build barricades from logs and crystal. He showed them where to place traps in narrow paths. Every hour counted. He worked beside them, his giant hands lifting what dozens of small ones could not. Slowly, the fear in their eyes began to change into determination. Lyra moved like a flame through the village, sharp and quick. She guided warriors into tunnels only she knew. She drew maps on the ground with glowing sticks explaining secret routes. Her courage inspired them. Even Daniel felt a strange pride rising as he watched her. So small yet commanding, like a born leader. By nightfall, the valley looked different. Weak walls now stood taller. Trenches glowed faintly with burning oil. Traps were hidden under leaves. The tiny people had transformed their home into a fortress. Still fragile but ready, Daniel loaded his rifle, checked the blade on his side, and whispered, "Let them come." And they did. The first horn blast shook the air. Then came the sound of many feet pounding the earth. The raiders appeared from the hills like shadows spilling into the valley. Their beasts roared, their weapons glowed red, torches lit the sky with fire. The ground trembled under their advance. The villagers clutched their weapons, their bodies trembling. Daniel stood at the front, towering above them. His rifle hummed as it charged. "Hold steady," he barked. His voice was thunder, strong. Enough to still their fear, the raiders charged, their leader raising a jagged axe. The first clash came fast. Arrows whistled from the villagers. Stones flew from slings. Daniel's rifle cracked like lightning, dropping raiders with every blast. The air filled with smoke and screams. A beast broke through a barricade, roaring as it snapped its metal jaws. Daniel sprinted forward, his blade flashing as he struck deep. Sparks flew, the beast crashed, but the enemy was endless. For every raider that fell, two more pushed forward. The barricade shook. Daniel shouted for the villagers to fall back. They retreated into tunnels while he covered them. His shots tore through the dark, the glow of his rifle painting him like a beacon. Inside the tunnels, Lyra guided groups through twisting paths. Her voice was sharp, her orders quick. She set traps behind them, causing explosions that slowed the raiders. Daniel fought his way back, meeting her deep inside the valley. His chest heaved, his arms burned, but his eyes stayed fierce. The siege raged on. Fire spread across the fields. Crystals shattered under heavy boots. The raiders laughed, thinking victory was near. Then one of them stumbled into a hidden pit. Another was caught in a burning snare. Slowly, the tide shifted. The tiny aliens fought with desperation, using every trap Daniel and Lyra had prepared. At last, Daniel spotted the raider leader, a massive brute with scars across his face. He cut through warriors like a storm. Daniel pushed forward, their eyes locking in the chaos. The leader sneered, "You fight for insects, giant. Pathetic." Daniel's reply was sharp. "Better to fight for them than to live like you." They clashed, steel against steel, the sound ringing through the valley. The duel was fierce. The leader swung heavy strikes, but Daniel's movements were sharp, precise, born from training and survival. At last he drove his blade into the brute's chest. The raider fell, roaring one last curse before silence took him. When their leader collapsed, the raiders faltered. Panic spread. Some tried to fight on. Others fled into the night. The siege broke like glass, leaving silence heavy over the valley once more. The villagers slowly emerged, their glowing eyes filled with disbelief. They had survived, against numbers that should have destroyed them. Lyra stood at Daniel's side, her small hand gripping his wrist. "We held them back," she whispered, her voice trembling but proud. Daniel looked around at the smoking valley, the broken barricades, the wounded villagers, and he knew the truth. This was not the end, only the beginning. The raiders had been beaten tonight, but they would return, and when they did, it would not just be a siege, it would be war. The smoke of battle still hung over the valley. The night was restless, filled with the groans of the wounded and the soft cries of children. Daniel walked slowly among the shattered barricades, his boots crunching on broken stone. His rifle hung heavy on his shoulder, but it was the weight in his chest that pressed harder. They had survived the siege, yes, but only just. Lyra walked beside him, her tiny steps fast to keep up. Her face was pale, but her eyes sharp. She carried a glowing shard of crystal, using it to light the broken paths. "You fought like a storm," she whispered. "But storms pass. The raiders will return again, stronger." Daniel gave a small nod. "I know, and this time we need answers. Not just walls, not just luck. We need to know who they really are." The chief gathered the elders in the council hut. The air inside was heavy with herbs and fear. Daniel sat cross-legged, his body towering over the tiny gathering. The chief's voice trembled as he spoke. "These raiders are not just bandits. They are servants of the Empire." At the word empire, the villagers gasped. Fear rippled across their glowing faces. Daniel leaned forward. What empire? The eldest among them, her skin cracked like old crystal, raised her trembling hand. Long ago, before your kind walked these stars, the empire came to us. They saw our crystals. They saw our light, and they wanted it. They enslaved our people, forced us to mine until our hands bled. Many died. Many vanished into their ships and never returned. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "We hid in this valley to escape. We have been hiding for generations." Daniel's chest tightened. It was not just about raids, it was about conquest. These raiders were not acting alone. They were the sharpened claws of a greater beast, he muttered. So that's why they won't stop. They're not just after food or land. They want your people as slaves. Lyra looked up at him, her voice steady. There is more. There is something you must see. She led him out of the hut, past the silent villagers, down a narrow tunnel carved deep into the rock. The walls, shimmered with old carvings, faded but alive with history. At the end of the tunnel lay a hidden chamber, glowing with hundreds of crystals. In the center stood a great stone covered in markings older than the village itself. This, Lyra whispered, touching the stone with her small hand, is our record, our prophecy. It speaks of a time when the empire would rise again, and, when they did, one knot of our blood would come to stand with us, a giant from the stars, a protector born of fire and war. He would be the shield we could not be. Daniel stared at the markings. The carvings showed small figures standing beneath. The shadow of a giant, a figure holding light in one hand and a blade in the other. His throat went dry. You think that's me? Lyra's eyes glowed faintly as she nodded. Not think, we know. You are the one. You came when all hope was fading. You fought when we had no strength left. You are the answer the old ones promised. Daniel turned away, running his hand through his hair. His voice was rough. I'm no prophecy. I'm no chosen one. I'm just a man who couldn't walk away. Don't put your future on my shoulders. I'll break under it. But the chief, who had followed them silently, stepped forward, his voice strong. You already carry it, whether you want to or not. The raiders will bring the empire down upon us. They will not stop, not until we are ashes. Unless you stand. With us, we are already lost. The chamber grew quiet. Only the faint hum of the crystals filled the air. Daniel felt the weight pressing down, heavier than any battlefield he had known. He had fought wars before, but always with comrades, always with a choice to leave. Now, for the first time, an entire people had no future without him. Lyra touched his hand gently, her voice softer. You are not alone. You have me. You have us. The bond was not made to trap you. It was made so you would never carry this weight alone. Daniel looked at her small hand against his. His heart was torn. He had sworn to never be tied again, to never lead anyone to their deaths. But looking at her steady eyes, at the chief's resolve, and at the prophecy carved in stone, he realized there was no turning away. He let out a slow breath. Then we need to prepare, not just for raids, but for war. If the empire is coming, we'll face them together. His voice was sharp. Filled with iron, Lyra's eyes lit up with pride. The chief bowed deeply. The elders whispered prayers of hope. That night, word spread across the valley. The giant had accepted the bond not only of family, but of destiny. For the first time in generations, the tiny people lifted their heads with courage. For the first time, they believed the empire could be resisted. But Daniel knew the truth in his heart. Prophecy or not, savior or not, the storm ahead would test them all, and if he failed, it would not only be their end, but his as well. The valley was quiet, but it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of waiting. The tiny aliens moved carefully through the village, rebuilding walls, sharpening crystal blades, and whispering prayers to the old stones. Above them, Daniel stood on a cliff, watching the horizon with hard eyes. The memory of the prophecy burned in his mind. The raiders were only the beginning. The empire itself would come. Lyra climbed the rocks to stand beside him. Her small hands carried a scroll of old maps. She unrolled it on the stone, her glowing hair brushing against his arm. They will strike here, she said, pointing to the narrow pass at the valley's edge. And here, Where the stream runs, they always come where we are weakest. Daniel studied the marks, his jaw tight. Then we make the weak places strong. The chief joined them, leaning on his staff. Giant, our people look to you now. They call you protector. They believe you can turn the storm. But I must ask, is that what you choose? Will you stand with us even if the empire itself comes? His words hung heavy. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Daniel turned to face him, his eyes dark with thought. He had always been a wanderer, a fighter who came and went, never staying long enough to be tied down. He had promised himself never again to carry the weight of others' lives. Yet here he was with a people who had nothing but his strength, and a bond sealed with a tiny wife who had shown more courage than many warriors he had known. He looked at Lyra. Her crystal eyes shone steady, not pleading, not begging, only believing. She had given him belonging when he thought he had none, and now she waited, trusting him to decide. Finally Daniel spoke, his voice sharp and steady. I could walk away, I could vanish into the stars, but I would never escape the memory of your faces. Your children, your trust, I would carry your deaths like chains, and I am done running from chains. He lifted his rifle, holding it against the red dawn. I will fight. I will stand. Anyone who comes for you will face me first. The chief bowed his head deeply. The elders behind him whispered blessings. Lyra placed her tiny hand on Daniel's arm. Then you are truly one of us, she whispered. The valley erupted in cheers. Their voices rose like a wave, echoing off the mountains. For the first time, they believed the empire could be resisted. Days turned into weeks as Daniel trained them. He showed the villagers how to fight in formations, how to set ambushes, how to use their small size as an advantage. He forged them into defenders, not just survivors. Children learned to signal with glowing stones. Women sharpened traps. Men drilled in tunnels. The valley became a fortress of the small, yet Daniel knew it would not be enough. The empire's strength was vast. His heart carried a truth he did not share. They might not win, but they would make the empire bleed. And sometimes, that was enough. One night, as he sat by the fire, Lyra approached quietly. She carried 2 cups of sweet water, handing one to him. You carry too much weight, she said softly. Daniel gave a tired smile. Comes with being the big guy. Lyra tilted her head. No, it comes with caring, and that is why you are protector, not just by prophecy but by choice. Her words cut through his doubt. For the first time in years, Daniel felt his wandering heart settle. He was no longer drifting through stars. He had people. He had purpose. He had a bond. When the empire finally came, the sky burned with their awe. Ships, the ground shook with their march, but in the valley, a human giant stood with tiny warriors at his side. His rifle glowed, his blade gleamed, his voice thundered, "Hold the line." And they did, not because they were strong, but because they believed. They believed in him, in themselves, in the bond they had woven. The first clash shook the mountains, but Daniel did not waver. He was no longer a wanderer. He was a protector, a shield, a storm. The battle raged, but even as fire lit the sky, the valley's people stood together. For the first time in their history, they did not run. And at the heart of it, a human fought. With all the fury of earth, whether prophecy or choice, whether destined or not, Daniel had become what they needed. A single man standing between a fragile people and an empire, and in that stand, humanity shone.